Okay, welcome back. We're on page 361 talking about how CUPS has replaced the LP command and the LPR command. Both of them will work. In other words, you can just close your eyes and pretend you're on a Berkeley system, or close your eyes and pretend you're on an AT&T system, and they both work. Everything works just exactly the same. So one of the cool things that happens that I won't be able to demonstrate here, but one of the things that happened is the CUPS setup and admin is a web page. Now, since we're in the command line only, I really can't do that here. But if we had the desktop version of Ubuntu, I could go point over to this machine. It shows up on port 631 rather than a typical port 80 kind of a thing. But just pretend. So I fire up my web browser and I point it to this machine's name, which is Ubuntu server. And then I put colon, I put 631, and it up pops this web configuration page. So I don't have to do all this stuff by the hand. I could type in and I could see the print jobs, and I can do all sorts of other stuff. Okay, so basically all utilities that talk to the print service is going to talk over that port, even if you installed it on a single machine when there's no network at all. It's still going to do that. Okay, isn't that kind of weird? All right. So port 361 is just, I don't know how that came about, but basically it's the command that the commands that they're talking through is what's called the Internet Printing Protocol. Okay, the IPP, which to tell you the truth is almost identical to the Hypertext Transport Protocol. So HTTP and IPP are almost identical. In fact, most people don't make a distinction between the two. If they said, well, CUPS is running on the HTTP service, and you go, okay. I mean, that's not technically correct, but that's okay. I mean, it's close enough. Okay. Now, if you want to get to a command line, here's how you would typically do something. If you had, we're not there yet because we don't have things going on. Normally, you would do like what I did. I would type LP and then space and whatever the name of the thing I was trying to do. That's provided, of course, I've got a print driver installed and I've got it configured. So if you have multiple print drivers installed, and I want to send it to, let me rephrase. I have multiple spoolers installed. I have one that's kind of close to me, and it's like a black and white printer, but a little bit further away is a color printer, and I want to specify which one I was going to talk to. Okay, cool. Then basically you would do LP or LPR, the name of the file, and then what's this thing? It's called a PostScript printer definition, a PPD file. Now, right off the bat, PostScript. Let me start from the historical perspective. In the old days, high-end printers had PostScript printers. Back in the early Apple days, the printers that they sold, the laser printers and stuff, were PostScript, which had an awful lot had a processor in it, and it had basically a programming language built into the printer that could do all sorts of magical and wonderful things. Today, you don't hear much about PostScript printers. Yes, some printers will support PostScript. Maybe if they do, if they don't, it probably doesn't really matter. The thing here is, during the period of time they were making this guy, not everything, but almost all the printers they were talking to were PostScript. So they call this a PostScript printer definition file. But that does not mean that the printer we're talking to supports PostScript. It was just kind of a leftover. That's what they called it. The name stuck. And so even if you are typing, you're doing to an HP, which is using HPCL language, okay, rather than PostScript, it's not using PostScript, you're still going to have one of these files, okay? I'm just saying. So the name stuck even though it doesn't really apply. Okay. So behind the scenes, what has to happen when you print something behind the scenes? So I take a thing like this and I say print. Well, to tell you the truth, there's a heck of a lot that has to happen. It has to look at it and figure out, well, wait a minute, am I supposed to take long lines and wrap them around? Somebody's got to do that, right? And wait, this thing is too long to fit on a page. Should I put in a page break and then start printing on page 2? And if so, what kind of margin do I put? Do I have like a 1-inch margin at the top and the bottom? So margins and page wrap and page numbers, and the headers and all that stuff, is an awful lot of stuff to do. So resizing something to fit a page. Let's say I had a graphic that was monstrously huge and I printed it. I probably don't want it, native size. I want it to be resized so it fits on the page, right? So resizing the page, if it's text, we're talking about word wrap. If it's graphics, we're talking about physically resizing. Pagination, ooh, isn't that a cool name? Pagination, where you have to break things up into pages, and maybe you have headers and footers, and maybe you have page numbers and stuff. And then, of course, translating the PostScript printer definition file into something that the printer actually really, really understands. Okay? So, yes, behind the scenes, there's a lot of things that have to happen. So let's talk about each one of the pieces one more time. So the print queue. The purpose of the print queue, that's the front end that people see, is to manage print jobs. That kind of makes sense. So it lists all the items that are in the queue. If there's 5 things currently being printed, it'll show all 5 of them and what % complete they're at. You can use that to get printer status, like to query a printer and saying, hey, is everything okay? Are you up and you're running? You got ink low, or are you out of paper? That kind of stuff. You can suspend, cancel, or change the priority using a print queue. I can go in there and say, I want to whack that print job because something's wrong. Or the boss is printing something and he says, screw you guys, I want to print ahead of your job. So even though he's like 10th in the line, he can go in there and move him up to the top of the queue so he gets printed before your stuff gets printed. And then even if, here's a scenario, let's say you had 2 printers. Remember the scenario I talked about where you're in a cube farm? So maybe you do an awful lot of printing. So instead of just having 1 printer there at the center of the cube farm, you have 2 printers. They're both connected to the same PC. But let's say that they're exact same HP model printers or Epson printers or whoever's printers there are. Okay. So that way, if one of the printers died or ran out of ink or ran out of paper, it would all just automatically switch over to the other one and keep on going. Isn't that pretty cool? So one of the things you can do from a print queue is I can move a print job from one queue to another. Let's say I'm getting ready. There's a light is blinking on this thing saying ink low. Now it's still printing, but it says ink low. And what I want to do is to shut that guy down, open him up, change the ink cartridge, and shut him, close him back up. But I don't want to disrupt anybody, so I moved all the jobs from that print queue over to the other printer, and then do my thing, and then let them come back. Kind of cool. All right. So multiple printers. So every printer has its own physical queue, right? Okay. Every printer has a queue, and I can move between queues. Cool. And then there's a thing called LP options. LP options is how you would set the default printer for a human. Like, for example, in the case of only having 1 printer, it's fairly obvious. Well, gee, which one's going to be the default? Oh, gee, let me think about that a minute. But LP options allow you to set the default printer for a human. So when they type LP / etc. group, it'll automatically just fire up and start printing. Okay, so the printer interface itself, the actual print driver thing. So you could have a single printer with multiple printer interfaces. You go, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Okay, so how about you had a printer where one of the interfaces does double-sided. See, that's kind of that's what's called an interface. In other words, I want just one-sided, or I want two-sided, or maybe I want collate and staple if your printer does that. Maybe I want color or black and white. Those kind of features. So those are interfaces. They're not really extra print drivers. They're just interfaces, so I can say, when I print, I want to print in color. The next time I want to print in black and white, or this time I want, double-sided, and next time I don't. So those are called interfaces. Okay. Now, the network printing, of course, basically I have to configure my printer to accept jobs over the interface, over the network. And you do that with that dang cups file, which we're going to do a little bit later on. So I'm going to skip that for the time being. Okay. On page 364, they start talking about filters. You know how in the early days of email, we had this thing called MIME. It was a multimedia internet. You're going to make me look it up. Anyway, MIME. So like PDF is an example, and PostScript is an example, and these filters, so to speak, are the actual like HPCL for talking to HP printers and talking to these guys. If I wanted to print to a PDF, that's not a real printer. That's kind of like a fake printer. I don't know how to describe it, but it's a printer, but instead of printing to a physical printer on a page, it prints to a PDF document. In fact, we're going to do that as an exercise because it's an easy way to install a printer that I know everyone has. If everyone installed a PDF printer, I can't tell what you have at home, right? So rather than have each individual student installing the correct printer driver for their printer, we're just going to install a PDF printer because I know that'll work for everybody. Okay, so some of the things you can do. Now ours is not going to have hardly any info whatsoever, I don't imagine. If I did LP info minus V, here's what it kind of sort of knows about. It knows I'm running over HTTPS, I'm running over an internet printing protocol, I'm running over BEH, I don't even know what the heck that is. It's running over a file, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So that basically shows the printers. If I did M, it's going to show me the drivers, which unfortunately in this case, I don't think I have any. Oh, I was kind of surprised. I did not think it had installed any drivers. Oh, okay. These are not the installed drivers. I apologize. These are all the drivers that it knows about. Because you could kind of sort of see the like where it says the Gutenberg print version, whatever, and Xerox favorite. This is all the ones it knows about, not the ones that are installed. Okay, cool. All right. For server admin, let's go back to 365 and let's go look at that cups file. Okay, so I'm going to have to go to sudo to be able to do that guy, right? So I'm going to do sudo vi cups sd dot config. Okay, cool. Let's just kind of look through here. So this is the configuration file that we're currently running. And so let's just kind of go through. So I'm currently listening on the local host, listening on 361. Okay, cool. And I've got sockets running. And then it talks about if I want to restrict the access to the server, what location do I want to say everybody can do anything? Or allow, deny kind of a thing on each one of the sections? I can say, I don't want anybody else, I rarely do any admin over the wire, so I don't want to allow remote administration. I don't want to allow remote configuration files, so this is fairly sophisticated. I mentioned that there's an awful lot of stuff in here. We're going to actually do one of these things where I actually talk about how to turn on the network. So right now we don't have the complete networking stuff installed. So I'm going to get out of this without making any changes. I'm just going to do a Q. Then we're going to do man on this. So man, I think it's going to be man cups or cups. I'm thinking it's going to be cups sd.config. Yeah, here we go. Cool. This basically tells you what everything means that we just saw. Do I purge the jobs? And do I allow browsing? And do I allow this? And it goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, there's tons and tons of stuff in here. The networking portions are the portions that we're going to have to be spending the most time on. But we'll get to that a little bit later on. I mentioned that changes are not immediate. So if I make a change to this, I have to restart the service. We already did that. Cool. And then typically, the system could automatically configure itself if it sees a printer. In other words, if you have a printer installed, it's going to say, wait a minute, I see this guy, so let me just go ahead and get the driver and do all my things, and I don't have to do anything, which is pretty cool. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so you know how this works.